Shirley here with Aristotle Moon, Venus and Jupiter. Venupiter. Hello, Venupiter. Well, Moon 28 degrees Pisces. Um, Venus Sour. This is in the 12th house where I am. And the cat from the talisman is arriving. Hello. So, a little bit about the Chiron ingress. Chiron ingress to Taurus. Chiron's placement in Taurus is opposing last degrees of Libra, first degrees of Scorpio. Last degrees of Cancer, first degrees of Leo, the bomb degrees, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki degrees. Last degrees of Capricorn, first degrees of Aquarius. And Chiron, ruled by Mars, that is about to be ruled by Venus. So the wound around the sense of self ingresses to the wound around values and unions. And the Chiron is semi-sextiling Uranus and Sedna. And this is where the Sedna component Chiron is going over the Sednas of the late Aries and beginning Uranus and beginning Taurus, which is the mid to late 60s. And at these degrees, it's already the mid to late 60s. That was the time we had Pluto and Uranus, with Saturn going all the way from Aquarius to Aries. And so around 60s, around the 67. And this is where think about 67 to 77. We're thinking about a war that created mass expansion in the Middle East, namely in Israel, leading to the October of 73 that was not so easy, and the confiscations of the banks when Chiron was around Beta Persei. So the failure of autarkic economy and the failure of the market bubble or the liberalization of the markets in the form of trying to create an investment bubble. Um, Mainly, Israel had to fund the people. After the 67 war, people didn't want to go to the army because they were like, hey, we won, we need to be partaking in the good life. Then the 73 war probably looked like a false flag. My parents married in 73, but they were in Netherlands. Um, I remember they couldn't send, from Israel, they couldn't send letters to congratulate them because their host was afraid that there would be bombs in mails coming from Israel. The bomb letters. Think about Uranus and Gemini, and this is the bomb letters. Karen Sedna can create a wound or address the wound around the trafficking nature of um, business and unions. Okay, Venupiter here square Chiron. Our business strategy need to accommodate for love that is actually loving. And that pertains to sovereignty, sense of self. Okay, it opposes the last degrees of Libra that tend to that through legislation, because here the tending to is through embodiment that need to be honored. And it simply asks for a different tactic than the tactics of the Libra Scorpio. It's kind of like we need different approach. I can think about it also as Chiron opposing the Venus of Libra and opposing the Mars of Scorpio. Chiron opposing the Venus, let's say if it would be 29-degree Libra Venus. Chiron opposing that Venus would be addressing the wound around the sense of self, that the agreements of or the decision of Libra needs to take into account. It can be classified technology, it can be dark occult. Chiron opposing the, and again, Chiron is not in 0-degree Taurus yet tropically, but Chiron opposing the Mars of Scorpio is um, somebody's strategy is meeting a wound, either creating a wound or meeting a wound regarding somebody's sense of embodiment. Now, to the timelines, why am I saying that Sedna was here? Because we want to look at Sedna when we look at international, the mundane level. Um, let's just say that way. In academia, there was a culture that um, that was not allowing the yes, no, and maybe of people to show. I remember back then I was thinking about the structure because I say, hey, the structure needs to allow people to separate or to take space and um, but here is not Capricorn. So it is more decentralized, but it's still squaring the beginning degrees of Aquarius, and this is where we have to maintain that the community is community of sovereigns. Because people mixed work with intimacy in a way that doesn't honor in full the sense of self of people. Um, and a little bit of energy reading. I'm getting someone that, and it may have been something that was a juxtaposition, but it's also around the structure and um, very simply put, a person's sovereignty includes their life energy and sense of embodiment. Now, there can be people that are in really, Aries is the head of, and Aries is the head of, and there's a certain situation here that somebody's drive or motivations or ways with the embodied is 12 o'clock from a certain wound around the embodied, and that wound, Chiron here comes to curate the wound of the embodied, so it doesn't allow the strategy of trafficking to yield. Now, people didn't used to call that trafficking. And also we have to ask ourselves, what is it that we want to achieve? Because if we are working in union, what do we want for each and every one of us? Um, the only way that working in, or so that such intimate type of union can work is when it honors the sovereignty of the individuals in it, ahierarchically. And with the ingress to Taurus, we are talking about the curation of the embodied. So if somebody was disembodied and thus trafficked, Chiron comes to curate that. And it can also be that because it was conjoined with, okay, many things that are considered in high rank, it can bring about, because Chiron is the wounded healer, so it can bring about what were the wounds of embodiment that the sadness stories, okay, or the use of occult that was not honoring the embodied. Um, and it can bring that about in both people because, let's say, I've previously mentioned that somebody, let's say, had, um, when it comes to sexual orientation, for example. So when we think about diplomacy, because Venus here is the diplomacy, is about the embodied in the diplomacy. And this is where, when I talked about the Israel-Palestinian apprenticeship and the fact that the prevalence of transactional energies was preventing them from having a water dependency um, business deal that would create peace in the Middle East. On a worldly scale, if I'm thinking, you know, the D word, Davos, the G word, Geneva, okay, um, alpha, beta, Ares, beta per se, then this is where um, this is where and now another thing that is coming about when it comes to either a business or a union or a working with um, if you think about, I was speaking about the fact that I was trying to rent a place outside of, let's say, my parents' house, and then the issues that came about. Um, that renting a place outside of my parents' house wasn't it wasn't going bricks, let's say. Ouchie. An ouchie topic. Okay, I wasn't going bricks. I was going into a place where the to improve upon the relations. And of course, it was also thinking about um, hoping to become autonomous economically. Now, the world is dealing just with those things. I mentioned Iceland. I mentioned the story of begging. Um, because we are called to embodiment, and embodiment. Now, here's the thing: it doesn't have to be rape trafficking. It can simply be um, appeasing. You know, we want to think about people that were favored by appeasing, and it goes all the way to the childhood, whether embodiment wounds or, and of course, if people grew in the places where the training of the children was, this is beginning to harm diplomacy, and whether it's from the economic perspective or from, whether people are aware of it or not, there is a um, calling to be embodied also when it comes to the finances. And it's an overall affecting things overall. Because if I think about feminism for a second, let me give you an example. I used to work in McDonald's. There was a boss, it was Virgo. That boss would work on his feet, I don't know how long, would wash his hands until his skin would get weird. He was basically self-abusive. And I called him out. I called him out in anger. Because it wasn't that he was a tyrant. It was that he was abusing himself. And because of that, it became impossible Okay. um, and when we talk about the feminism, or even, these are also conversations that a lot of people would have even with their mothers, or even husbands would have with the wife says, "Oh, could you take care of the babies? I need to rest," and then he finds her still doing the dishes. Like he can take care of the baby, but he cannot take care of the baby and make sure that she rests at the same time. Now, with feminism, it is the same because in the secret societies where the things would be allocated, let's say, there would be also horrible training methods, but also it's the men that they were, and that affected the wealth consolidation roles in the world. Now, um, also when there were situations in marriage where people would be, let's just say, appeasing. This is how we had professors that thought that women don't like sexuality. No, they need a sexuality that honors their own erotic and non-erotic self, and also orgasmic self. Okay, this, Karen does bring core wounds. It is into discussion. Ketu Magha, if you think about where societies that were patriarchal and the respect of, there was this patriarchal notion of a respect of, could woman orgasm there? It is becoming incredibly, when we are at the juncture of the head of the what breaks orgasmic birthing, the head of the baby appears, which is between Pisces and Aries. The world has to accommodate for that. Chiron is opposing the late Pluto Librans and the early Pluto Scorpios. Now these Plutos are after the degrees of their Pluto square, which means they are midway into evolving into where Chiron is. Sovereign embodied sense of self. Um, to the on world politics, it's very obvious that people that are raped will never be loyal. They will only be loyal to what is honoring their sense of self and embodiment. We cannot talk of treason without abolishing rape. And there's also a calling out of, for the people that are in those, it's kind of like, hey folks, what about the competence of honoring the sense of self and embodiment of the feminine? With Now, if it is not a question of competence, it means that there was trauma there in the training of. Ehud Barak, for example, he could take us out of Lebanon, and now we are getting into Lebanon the third time. Maybe some ice cream with but but the fact that the speech wounds could have been related to Epsteining wounds as child caused the failure of keeping Israel out of Lebanon effectively, and the death and massacre of billions around the world. Why? Because the dossiers were global. Let me take a look at the Ehud Barak natal chart. Now, when person is Chiron Venus is going to face people, it's just like feminism, you know. Um, it is people. I talked about people will be leveling up and challenging one another's. Um, how should I say that? The way that we have been undermining ourselves will be challenged. And it's usually, think about growing children. I cut contact with my mom for 2 years around the Me Too. Okay? It's not that my mom was a patriarch oppressive, no. In fact, there were times where she didn't work, she tried to be entrepreneur because she didn't like the culture of trying to have, and she wasn't willing to do for things for a living, and that's how the wealth eroded. And then the child was even more sensitive, because if she could see the news and see, oh yeah, there were the people climbing up the ladder by blah blah blah, then her child would be challenging also with, well, was birth inorgasmic? Well, for as holistic health practitioner, it's medically impossible to have sex in transactional situation, whether married or dating or not, without the creation of what candida, various diseases, and eventually cancer and neurodegenerative diseases. That's, by the way, what to do also with monoclosis and Epstein-Barr. Where's the chart? Unverified. Can we see a chart? Yeah. Ascendant 12 degrees Sagittarius, ascendant to my Uranus. And indeed I saw Uranus here. Uranus was like, oh, Uranus beta per se? Does he have Uranus beta per se? No, yeah. He has Uranus beta per se. 22 Saturn. But he was born around the building of the death camps, 1942. Sol 22 in Aquarius, Mercury 18 degrees, Venus 8 degrees. We have Lord of Fortunes very adjacent, if this is correct, ascendant midheaven. I remember I learned about Ehud Barak when I was a child. We both had this thing where I actually usually was prepared with the homework, but I would still not read from the notebook. I would think about the answer. So I remember that people people talked about Ehud Barak in that regard next to me. I don't remember in what context, but Rahu Virgo, Ketu Pisces is having Rahu Ketu reversal. Midheaven Alkaid, Neptune, Midheaven Neptune. I also have Midheaven Neptune conjunction, but around Sagittarius and Capricorn. He has it around Alkaid. This means that he could be, for Ehud Barak, it means that people could see him as something that he's not. But the speech impairment tells me that there's something there. Doesn't show me Chiron. Chiron, I think, would either be in the beginning of Aquarius or the end of Capricorn. No. Wait. Or Capricorn? No. Sorry. Not at all. Parents 49. I had Chiron Sag. Could have been either Chiron Sag or Chiron Scorpio. Think Chiron Scorpio. Chiron Scorpio is something to do with the psychosexual, and it can be affecting blood circulation. And Sun squares Saturn and Uranus. I remember when I ran into with certain things that to do with the elite, and I said, well, it's like the concentration camps. This was like literally the person was born during the building of the death camps. So it's like we have to curate this wound. And with people around this time, people were going through horrible abuses that affected everything, and the babies, the infants that were born would be affected. So those wounds need to be, and that could have created, how should I say, entire pedophilia culture and wedding and puberty culture is a result of that. Because he was quoted saying that he slept with 12, 13 years old, but he didn't think it is wrong. And this is where there would be a hyper normalization of those things in order to create extortion code. And I talked about not playing to extortion code logic prior to the exposure of what the 30 million files and the media conglomerates that ook in Nederlands. And uh, there are many things there that are coming about. Um, and we have to also understand that these wounds, they create chronic inflammation that eventually erupts into as something that's unfortunately prevalent in global society. And then people are worried about, I don't know what are they worried about, because they need to abolish that before they worry about anything. um, Lilith is 0-degree Cancer. Now here's the thing, but people are also, how should I say, but people are harassed in some way and then they begin to speak. People could go into the mythical because they have chronic helplessness. Um, I don't know. Sun 18 degrees, Mercury 11 degrees. It's compiling to, I want to look at CERN. You know, there's some energy, and but this energy is its control and power, and they're very good, they're very diplomatic, they're very good at, and this can be a correlation to the Procyon anger, the Gazer in Procyon, because there's something about the strategy that is it's obvious where it stems from. Let's just say you have Pluto 0 degree, a Scorpio, but it causes to the person, and I'm also trying to be self-reflective here. It causes to the person to be so much in control that it stifles itself. um, because here's the thing, you could get people, let's say, to do, how should I say that? Um, oh, 1 second. You could get people to do you, but then you have to put to question what is it that you are heading to achieve, because when it's not aligned with who they are, then it's stifling to that energy. And then you would be complaining that that you're feeling stifled. Okay, this is people have, let's say, Mars in Scorpio in those degrees, or placements in Scorpio, whether Mars, Sun, I don't know, or even Lilith. I mean, I don't know if Lilith, yes or no, but it's kind of like, yeah, you could get, it's like kind of like, yeah, you could get your way, but do you actually want it? Would you not feel stifled if you got your way with that person? Because the message that you're delivering to that person is like, hey, hey, come and work for me, or I want you to be with me, or I'm like, okay, but there's another person there, and then it's like, oh, if you're not, then go be here, go live here. It's like, okay, let, that ultimatum creation, is it actually, and I'm talking about, you understand that I'm talking here about, if I'm talking about CERN. Uh, And there were so many conversations about atomic. Yeah.
שירלי, אם אני מתקשרת, למה את לא עונה?
אני מקליטה. רגע.
ואם היה לי משהו והייתי צריכה אותם דחוף?
דקה, מאמה, גם לי יש משהו ואני צריכה דחוף להקליט כרגע. ואני לא צוחקת את זה. This is, רגע, את לא יודעת מה אני עוברת, די.
אני לא עוברת כלום.
אני מדברת על מה אני עוברת, את לא יודעת כרגע.
אוש. מה זה אחר הזה?
Recording. It's like if you want me to be there, you have to abolish ritual abuse. If you're incompetent in doing that, no. Don't use power tactics, because to try to disempower would put people in a helpless situation, and that within the Neptune-Pluto sextile is becoming atomic power, that you will not be able to yield at your own. Okay, Uranus is squaring the Uranus-Plutos there. There's also an issue with, if somebody took space and provided space, okay? Then and this speaks to me to the centrifugal, there's something that's atomically, not right now, sorry. And we experience that as people. Okay. Okay. Also the question, what are we creating here for the world? My vision of the world is not of human trafficking. My vision of the world is, well, the world is a sovereign world. It's not that there are the sovereigns and the not sovereigns. because I can see also sometimes like a child can see, and I think is mutual. Like people can see the child in me, and I can see the child in people. But what are we creating for the world? What do we want this world to be? What are we creating this world to be? And I think the question about the vision came up. It also pertains to fertility. I was talking about the breeding farms and the egg. If I think about, let's say, two gay couple that want a woman to birth baby for them, okay? First of all, they want that baby to be happy, to be thriving, to be, and also, what are we birthing? Do we agree on the vision? Do we agree on how to grow kids? I don't think growing kids in situations where as childhood they're exposed to sexuality with adults is something that they would be a happy, thriving individuals. I spent actually several decades coming into embodiment and shifting because there was something missing in eroticism in my life. So I wouldn't want, let's say, to bring children to the same condition. What do we want the world to look like, to be like, to feel like? People need, I believe people need a shared, people, each person has for their own vision, and those visions are not subjugated to one another. And they can, and the embodied here is of utmost value because it's about the lines of orgasmic birthing. It's not about